As the night falls and the darkness creeps in, the world around us changes. Shadows seem to grow longer and the silence becomes deafening. But what happens when the silence is broken by the sound of footsteps that don't belong to anyone you know? What happens when you hear a whisper in your ear, but there's no one there? Welcome to our world of horror, where the unknown is the only certainty and fear is the only emotion. Brace yourself, because the journey we're about to take is not for the faint of heart. The sun had long since set over the small town, and the only light came from the distant stars above. The family had just finished dinner and were settling in for a quiet evening at home. They had no idea what horrors awaited them. The sound of shattered glass and splintering wood broke the silence, followed by a rush of cold air that sent shivers down the spines of the family members. They heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate, as four strangers entered their home. The strangers were dressed in all black, their faces obscured by masks. They were armed with guns, knives, and other menacing objects. The family was completely unprepared for this sudden and violent invasion. At first, the strangers just stood there, looking around the room with cold, calculating eyes. The family members, frozen in terror, could only stare back at them. The air was thick with tension as the strangers began to speak. "We need your help," one of them said, his voice muffled by his mask. The family members exchanged confused looks. What could these strangers possibly need from them? "We need you to make a choice," the stranger continued. "A choice that could determine the fate of the entire world." The family was stunned. What kind of choice could possibly have such far-reaching consequences? The stranger went on to explain that they were part of a secret organization that had been monitoring the family for some time. They had determined that the family was the only group of people who could make the choice that needed to be made. The family was still confused, but the strangers were insistent. They demanded that the family come with them to a secret location, where they would be presented with the choice that would determine the fate of humanity. The family had no choice but to comply. They were bound and gagged, blindfolded and taken to a remote location, where they were held captive by the strangers. The family had no idea what was in store for them. They were terrified, alone, and completely at the mercy of these four strangers who seemed to hold the fate of the world in their hands. As the family was held captive by the four strangers, they were given a harrowing ultimatum. They were told that they had to make a choice between two options: willingly sacrifice one of their own or allow the apocalypse to destroy humanity. The family was understandably shocked and horrified by this impossible choice. They had no idea what kind of situation they had been forced into. The strangers explained that they were part of a secret organization that had discovered a prophecy predicting the end of the world. According to the prophecy, the only way to prevent the apocalypse was to make a sacrifice of the highest order. The family members were informed that they were the only ones who could make this sacrifice, and that they had to do it willingly. They were told that they had to choose one member of their family to sacrifice, and that this sacrifice would prevent the apocalypse from occurring. The family was given a short amount of time to discuss the matter among themselves. They were each grappling with their own emotions and thoughts about this impossible choice. Some members of the family were willing to make the sacrifice, believing that it was the only way to save humanity. Others were horrified at the idea of sacrificing a loved one, even if it meant saving the world. As the time to make the decision drew closer, tensions within the family rose. Arguments broke out, tears were shed, and tempers flared. Eventually, the family made their decision. They chose a member to be sacrificed, hoping that it would be enough to prevent the apocalypse and save humanity. The strangers took the chosen member away, leaving the rest of the family to wonder if they had made the right decision. Days passed, and there was no sign of the apocalypse. The family members who had made the sacrifice were plagued by guilt and grief, while the rest of the family struggled to come to terms with what had happened. But as time went on, the family began to suspect that something was not right. They had been tricked by the four strangers, who had used their fear and desperation to manipulate them into making a terrible decision. The family was left to wonder what the true intentions of the four strangers were, and what kind of terrible fate they had narrowly avoided. After the family had been held captive for several days by the four strangers, they began to realize that they had to take matters into their own hands. They couldn't just sit around and wait for the strangers to make their next move. The family members knew that they were dealing with dangerous and unpredictable individuals. They had to be smart, resourceful, and willing to take risks in order to escape. They began to plan their escape, whispering to each other in hushed tones whenever the strangers weren't looking. They scoured the room for any objects that they could use to help them, including pieces of broken glass, sharp objects, and anything else they could get their hands on. As they worked on their escape plan, the family members also tried to learn as much as they could about the four strangers. They listened carefully to their conversations, trying to pick up any clues that could help them understand their motives. They soon realized that the four strangers were not what they seemed. They had been tricked into making a terrible decision, and they were now at the mercy of a group of people who were intent on causing destruction and chaos. The family knew that they had to act quickly. They waited until the strangers were distracted, then sprang into action. They attacked the strangers with everything they had, using the broken glass and sharp objects to defend themselves. The strangers were taken aback by the sudden attack, and the family members were able to overpower them. They managed to escape from their captivity, but they knew that they were not out of danger yet. The strangers would surely come after them, and they had to be ready for whatever was to come. The family members fled into the woods, running as fast as they could. They knew that they had to put as much distance between themselves and the strangers as possible. As they ran, they came across an abandoned cabin in the woods. It was run down and dilapidated, but it offered shelter and a place to hide. The family members huddled together in the cabin, trying to catch their breath and plan their next move. They knew that they couldn't stay in the cabin forever, but they also knew that they couldn't just run blindly into the night. They had to come up with a plan, and fast. They couldn't let the strangers catch them again, or all would be lost. As the family members huddled together in the abandoned cabin, they knew that they had to make a plan. They couldn't just sit around and wait for the four strangers to find them. They knew that they were dealing with dangerous and unpredictable individuals, and they had to be careful. They spent hours strategizing, trying to come up with a plan that would allow them to confront the strangers and take them down. Finally, they came up with a plan. They would lure the strangers into a trap, using the cabin as bait. They would set up traps around the cabin, hoping to catch the strangers off guard. The family members knew that they were taking a huge risk, but they had no other choice. They couldn't let the strangers get away with what they had done. They spent the next few hours setting up the traps, using everything they could find in the cabin. They set up tripwires, spiked pits, and other makeshift devices designed to take down the strangers. As they worked, the family members were tense and on edge. They knew that the strangers could show up at any moment, and they had to be ready. Finally, the strangers arrived. They approached the cabin cautiously, wary of what might be waiting for them inside. As they stepped into the cabin, the family members sprang into action. They triggered the traps, causing the strangers to fall into the spiked pits and trip over the tripwires. The strangers were caught off guard, and they were quickly taken down by the family members. The struggle was intense and brutal, with the strangers fighting for their lives. In the end, the family members emerged victorious. They had defeated the 4 strangers, and they had saved themselves and humanity from their evil plans. But the victory was bittersweet. The family members were left with deep scars and emotional trauma from their ordeal. They knew that they would never be the same again. As they looked out at the world around them, they saw the signs of the apocalypse beginning to unfold. The sky was darkening, the ground was shaking, and they knew that it was only a matter of time before the end came. They had saved humanity, but at what cost? They were left to wonder if they had made the right decision, and if there was anything they could have done differently. But as they stood there, watching the world come to an end, they knew that they had done what they had to do. They had fought for their survival, and they had saved humanity from the brink of destruction. After the final showdown with the 4 strangers, the family members were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. They had survived the ordeal, but they were forever changed by it. They had saved humanity from destruction, but at a tremendous cost. They had been forced to make an impossible choice, and they had taken lives in order to save others. The family members struggled to cope with the aftermath of what had happened. They were haunted by the memories of their captivity and the violence that had ensued. They were plagued by nightmares, flashbacks, and feelings of guilt and regret. They wondered if they had done the right thing, and if there was anything they could have done differently. As the days passed, the world around them began to change. The apocalypse had arrived, and there was no stopping it. The family members were left to navigate a world that was rapidly descending into chaos and destruction. They struggled to find food, water, and shelter as the world around them fell apart. They encountered other survivors, some friendly and some hostile. They tried to cling to a sense of normalcy, to hold on to the things that made them feel human. They told stories, played games, and laughed together when they could. But they knew that the end was near. They saw the signs of the apocalypse all around them, and they knew that it was only a matter of time before they too succumbed to its effects. As the end drew near, the family members held each other close. They knew that they had to face their final moments together, as a family. They shared their final thoughts, their hopes and fears, and their love for each other. They made peace with their past, and they embraced the uncertainty of their future. In their final moments, the family members were surrounded by the chaos and destruction of the apocalypse. But they were also surrounded by love, and by the knowledge that they had done what they had to do to save humanity. As the world around them faded away, the family members closed their eyes and surrendered to the darkness. They knew that they had left their mark on the world, and that their sacrifice would never be forgotten.